Kia ora, welcome to Shared Lunch, brought to you by Sharesies with BusinessDesk. My name is Frances Cook. Before we get started, here's some important information. Investing involves risk. You might lose the money you start with. We recommend talking to a licensed financial advisor. We also recommend reading product disclosure documents before deciding to invest. Everything you're about to see and hear is current at the time of recording. Today we are joined by Dr. Ayesha Scott, Senior Lecturer in Finance at AUT. Welcome, Ayesha.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being with us. Let's talk the psychology of investing. And to start at the beginning, what do we mean when we talk about the psychology of investing? What's included there?
Well, I tend to think of this as a really broad concept, right? But it fundamentally just starts with how we view money, our spending, our saving, that very personal relationship we have with it, that of course flows through to investing. And then how we invest. And all of that put together, how risky we like things, whether we're materialistic, whether we're impulsive, all of that stuff gets bundled in together. We live in the world around us, and of course, all that external stuff is impacting us. And, all of it mixes together, and that informs how we invest. So our investing attitudes, what we like, what we don't like, what we enjoy and what we don't enjoy, all of that is mixed in here. And so that tends to be how I think about the psychology of investing. It's a little bit personality, it's a little bit environment, and it's a lot the people around us, I think.
Yeah, so what sort of factors come into play there in order to change our attitudes towards money? And then, of course, it's going to change how we act as well, how we do things like invest it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, if I'm a really materialistic person, so I value, things over experiences, for example, although experiences are arguably important as well. But if I'm really materialistic and I value having stuff and nice stuff, then I'm maybe going to find it difficult to save my money. And of course, that's going to flow on to my investment portfolio, very much so. But if I'm also that materialistic person and I am being bombarded by advertisements all of the time, then I'm not even going to necessarily find it very easy to moderate that part of myself. It's going to be difficult for me. So what I need to do is actually know that I'm materialistic and then set myself up for success so I can reach my financial goals. And I think it's that financial goal setting piece and setting ourselves up for success there that really allows us to, invest in line with our values, in line with our risk preferences, but also actively working parts of that story that we have, that financial personality that we have, that investing personality that we have. We can work with the bits we like and work against the bits we don't like. And I think that that's really key for people to realize. It starts with knowing yourself, basically.
Well, exactly. I think that knowing yourself is such a key part of this. We're going to be talking in fairly broad brushstrokes at a lot of points in this conversation. I think it's important to say there's always devil in the detail. But if we look at it broadly and generally, what sort of money personalities and investing personalities are there? Are there sort of broad categories that we can generally slot people into?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to general money management, we tend to kind of have that, very binary kind of say spending spectrum. But when it comes to investing specifically, I think it's easier to consider this in terms of the amount of risk that we're comfortable taking. So, if you are someone who is going to have to hold yourself back from going all in on really risky investments, then that's really handy to know about yourself so that you can kind of, pare that back, hold yourself back, keep yourself accountable, maybe make some of the, middle ground decisions that are going to help you reach your goals without going all in on the latest fad. On the flip side of that, if you're someone who is deeply uncomfortable with taking risk, you may not be taking advantage of everything that investing, affords us, which is making your money work for you rather than you having to go out and work for every single dollar in your bank account. And so I think that, if you consider this on a risk spectrum, then most of us, for our investing at least, can place ourselves somewhere along that spectrum, and then in tune with where we are in our life, our age, stage, what our circumstances are, what our goals are. That's when we can make that investment decision. But we need to kind of push ourselves a little bit if we're naturally conservative, and maybe hold ourselves back if we're naturally risky.
Yeah, and it's so useful to know those things about yourself. And I think as well, another thing can be quite moderating when you talk to other people who have different perspectives on money as well. And I think that can often be one way of balancing out any natural inclinations that you have and rounding off some of your own edges, is when you talk to other people who have a different perspective on it. I mean, do you think that New Zealanders in general, do we talk about money very well, or are we often a bit hesitant about it?
Oh, we're totally hesitant. Anyone who's listening to this is probably, less hesitant about talking about money, but that's not necessarily the case. I mean, it's one thing to jump on a webinar here, but, by all means, chat to each other in the discussion, because it's all, money conversations. I mean, New Zealand has a money taboo. We don't like talking about it. And, it is shifting, but it's arguably not shifting far enough, fast enough for everyone to get to where they need to be, I think, on this. And that's a big part of, what I talk about is think about your values, think about the people around you who you love and respect, and then talk to them about your values. And money is going to come up in that, because money is our tool that helps us get there. I think it's really, really important that we recognize talking about investing, but talking about saving, talking about spending, all of that stuff, it's normal. We all do it. And, we talk about everything else. So why don't we also talk about money?
Yeah, and often these attitudes towards our money, it starts really early in our lives. Do you think our parents and what we saw in childhood, does that have a big impact?
Oh, absolutely. So we know that kids form their, opinions and attitudes and, their own little money personalities really early on. I was quite surprised. I went and talked to my son's, year 1 or 2 class, and these kids, they got compound interest, and I didn't really. I was teaching pretty much the same stuff that I teach to, first year university students. So, kids get it. We need to accept that they are, whether we are telling them stuff or they are just watching how we do things, they are absorbing that. They're little sponges. I mean, the technical term for this is financial socialization. But basically it means, who and how your money attitudes were modeled to you and what influenced that growing up. I mean, we internalize these messages. So if we want to upskill our kids or anyone who is looking to you for guidance on this, it might not be your kid, it might be a sibling, it could be a niece or nephew, it could be a mate. Anyone who's looking to you for guidance, think about what you learnt growing up and how you learnt that. Because some of the messages that our parents give us are positive and some of them are negative. And we want to emphasize the positive, and we want to, work against that negative message, I suppose, that lesson that doesn't serve us now.
And I do think it's one of those things, right? When you're thinking about childhood and starting those money attitudes early on, they can be really deeply rooted. And I think it causes a lot of anxiety for parents thinking about trying to get it right. And it is often something that when people are thinking about their own money attitudes and money behaviors, that it can be quite difficult to overcome some of those things that we saw and learned in childhood. I mean, I think about with my own kid, he's just hit 15 months. Our current thing that we are working on is teaching him how to brush his teeth, which might sound very different from money, but stick with me here. He, as soon as you put anything in his mouth right now, he just chomps. He thinks it's hilarious. He bites down, he giggles at you, he doesn't let it go. This does not work for brushing one's teeth. But if I hold him and hand him the toothbrush preloaded with toothpaste and I brush my teeth, he copies me. And that's the only way that we've found to show him brushing your teeth time. Here's how we do it. So I brush my teeth with him. And I think, I've talked to a lot of people about money behaviors. What it seems to come down to over and over again is that if you are trying to set your kids up well, that it's about modeling and including your kids in things and letting them see things, and that just having those conversations and saying, this is what you should do technically, that's not always the most effective, is it?
No, absolutely not. And I think really giving kids insight into our own decision-making process is really important. So, for example, I'm quite impulsive. I just am. My husband, polar opposite. My kids, partly because they're kids, but also because I like to think they inherited the better parts of both our personalities, are extremely impulsive. So we have to, not just model our own decision-making process and discuss. My husband and I will have discussions like, I'm looking at buying this new keyboard. I don't really need it, but it's a good deal. And they will hear this. They don't need to be actually involved in that conversation, but they will hear this and they will be absorbing that information sort of by osmosis. When it comes to their spending, so my kids are 10 and 8, they get a little bit of pocket money. We've attached this to what is probably quite a light level of chores for the average household. They do get an all right run of it. But if they don't do their chores, they don't get paid. When it comes to spending that money, we don't put limits on them. They can save it, they can spend it, they can give it away. We don't mind. When it comes to spending it, however, they have to walk out of the shop, think about it, and if they still half an hour later want to buy the toy, they can go back in, and as long as they've got the money for it, they can do that. What I'm aiming to teach them here, and this is linked to investing, so bear with me, what I'm trying to teach them is when it doesn't matter, right? They're not paying rent, they're going to have dinner on the table. When their spending decisions are really low stakes, I want them to practice all of these skills that once they're adults and they're actually in charge of these bigger decisions for themselves, they know it's okay to sleep on it. They know they don't have to give in to every impulse, that not every ad is the best ever of whatever it is. There will be another sale. All of those things that we have had to learn because our parents didn't explicitly teach this stuff, we are trying to walk our kids through this. And it's experience that matters here, not just sitting down and having, quite frankly, what can be a very boring conversation about what you should do and what you can't do. Because if I was 10 and I was 8, I would tune out, and that's probably going to teach me that money is boring. And when I get older and I've got a little bit of money, that investing is boring, which we know, because we're all sitting here, is not the case. Finance is fun. It should be fun. Money is a tool. And it, is a barrier to learning about it if we think it causes stress, if we're worried about it, if it causes fights for our family. All of those things are going to influence our own view of money. And so when it comes to teaching our kids or the people around you that you're influencing about money, think about the stuff that you learned that was really useful and has served you really well, and amplify that for them. And then really work against, even, if you have to think about this for yourself, talk about the stuff that doesn't serve you, that really held you back, because that's just as important, I think.
Yeah, well, on that, if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, I think that I might have absorbed some bad money lessons that, I think just about every parent is trying their absolute best, but none of us are perfect people. And so if you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh, I think I absorbed some money lessons that weren't great, and now I've got some money attitudes that I don't love, and I would like to change them, but I don't know where to start, and it's been going for years now, it's pretty deep in there, how much of this can you change? How do you go about changing it? Is it even possible?
Of course it's possible. Almost anything can be shifted. Some things take more work than others. And of course, it's going to depend on the resources that you have at your disposal. But the first thing I think that's really important is do the work to figure out the person you are right now, and then also think about the person you're aiming to be. Because I think we can set really high standards for ourselves. And really, the beginning of this, if you are at the beginning, is to figure out where you are right now. What is the financial situation right now? What is your money personality right now? What are these stories that you don't think are particularly useful? And then who you want to be. And I think it's then about identifying that one thing you can do today, in the next hour, right now, that's going to push you just incrementally closer from where you are to who you want to be. And I mean, look, share the burden as well. My kids are impulsive. I'm impulsive. My husband is not impulsive. If I'm feeling like I am struggling a little bit, controlling that part of my personality, work's busy, retail therapy is a vice, then I talk to him about it. I let him help me kind of moderate myself if I'm feeling like it's a little bit of a struggle. And so I really think that you can change anything. The key is just having those conversations with yourself and with the people that you love and that love you back.
I saw something really great the other day about motivation, and they were talking about how it's really difficult if you try to rely on motivation in the day-to-day. That's going to come and go. But if you think about it in terms of what does future me, the person I want to become, what do they want from me now? And I've held on to that, and I've found that hugely motivating. So just putting that out there for anyone else who may or may not find that useful, but I found that hugely motivating. If we're talking, still speaking quite generally, obviously, is there a difference in how men and women approach investing? And are there strengths, weaknesses of both?
Yeah, so obviously you gave the disclaimer I was about to give. So talking in generalizations here. But again, some of those stereotypes that we've all been brought up with are not shifting as quickly as we would hope. Yes, there are differences. Interestingly, the New Zealand actuaries did a study on KiwiSaver balances, and they found that actually some of the long-held views about the differences between how men invest versus women, and I'll tell you those views in a sec, they actually found it was less associated with gender and more associated with how much money people had to invest. So it came more from, the idea of abundance versus the idea of lack, rather than a gender thing. However, we know that women tend to have less money to invest, on average, because of things like the gender pay gap, career breaks, unpaid work, and all of that stuff. Okay, so we know that those things still exist. But to be honest, the research hasn't really arrived on a consensus, and it is a generalization to some extent. And of course, we don't have anywhere near enough work done on the non-binary part of the community. But if we accept that the society we live in is complex, the financial world we live in is increasingly complex, and that individuals within that world and within that society are also complex, okay, then we get a little bit closer to figuring out some of these generalizations. For men, they tend to be more overconfident and tend to rate themselves when it comes to finance more highly than women do. So women tend to be more conservative when it comes to all sorts of financial decisions. Okay, I think this comes down to confidence. So the finance industry is still very male dominated. For better or worse, we still have a whole heap of gender norms and stereotypes. Everyone will have seen all the work that is going into promoting women in finance, women in STEM, and this starts from school, okay? When girls are little, they get, steered in certain directions, and when boys are little, they get steered in certain directions. So we're overcoming a lot, I think, when it comes to that societal stuff. Also, women tend to adopt financial innovation a little bit later than men do. So I think that, again, this might speak a little bit to confidence, but additionally, it could also speak to the fact that women are just waiting to see how it's going to pan out. They're using that time to learn, because what we do know is that when women do invest, sorry boys, we do better. We are outperforming you. And I have, and there is research to back that up. But I think that when it comes to gender, there's a whole heap of stuff going on. Every individual needs to do their own work themselves. And I think that it comes down to knowing what you feel you need to know, having the confidence then that you can trust yourself, trust your process, and backing yourself to reach your financial goals. And I think if we all do that, then maybe, we can override some of these generalizations.
I think another key thing as well is, at the moment, we are seeing so much volatility in the market. We're really seeing ups and downs and sideways. We're getting there's domestic decisions that are impacting the markets. There's overseas decisions that are impacting the markets. And honestly, it's predicted to stay pretty choppy out there for the next 6 months to a year. Who knows how it will actually play out? That's simply a prediction. Nobody knows the future. But, if it does stay choppy for a while, and considering we've already seen it be quite up and down, how do we see different types of investors react in these situations? I mean, what sort of behaviors tend to come out at moments like this?
Yeah, so again, it comes down to that risk. So when things are going, in finance, when we talk about risk, we don't mean just bad stuff. We don't mean just it going down. We mean also, what is your upside, risk of it going up? So risk in finance is a very neutral term, even though we tend to associate it with the downside. How risky do you like things, right? And what are you comfortable with? So in the early part of the pandemic, what we saw was a lot of investors didn't have very much experience with market volatility, with it going up and down all over the shop. The market fell away. A whole heap of people freaked out about that, and they immediately shifted from what was probably an appropriate risk level and investment for them into a much more conservative approach. Now, the problem with this is that they locked in that fall away, right? And they couldn't take advantage when it immediately turned around and started going up again. So I think here you need to know yourself, What is the type of risk that you're comfortable with taking? If you are someone who's really conservative, but you know that you need to push yourself because you can take those bigger risks, then when the market's chopping around, trust your process. You made those decisions already. The market going up and down, that doesn't matter. That's not changing the goal of, having a retirement nest egg necessarily. So what you need to do is just back yourself. You made those decisions, and maybe just don't tune into the news.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I would say that, as long as you made that appropriate risk decision for your age, stage, your goals, as long as you did that in terms of a well-diversified portfolio, so you spread your investments out over lots of different things, you're going to insulate yourself as much as possible from some of these really big market forces that we're seeing at play here, and all of the things that are out of our control. Markets go up, they go down. That's what they do. That's their thing. That's their whole purpose. The trick is for us, I think, making sure that we don't freak out when they behave exactly how we expect them to.
Just quickly, we're going to do sort of a bit of a slight quick fire before we jump into those audience questions. And we are going to look at some classic money statements and maybe reframe them to put them in a slightly healthier way. So the first one I want to look at is money doesn't buy happiness. This is personally a bugbear of mine, but Ayesha, what do you think of the money doesn't buy happiness, and how would you reframe that?
Oh, okay. Reframe. Money buys me freedom to live my values. So money's not going to make me happy. Not having enough will definitely be a stressor on my life. But honestly, money is a tool. It buys freedom. And what do we use that freedom for? We use that freedom to live in line with our values and to care about the people that we love. That's it. That's what money's for.
That's excellent. And I think that's a really good reframer. All right. What about money doesn't grow on trees?
I have big feelings on this one, Francis. So not everyone has to work hard for money. But if you want kind of a slightly more new agey one, money flows easily to me. And, I think this goes back to trusting the process. I'm making my money work for me.
That's brilliant. All right, let's jump into some of these audience questions because we have some great ones. We're going to start with this one from Bill because it's got the most upvotes and it's a great question. Could you comment on falling share prices at the same time as falling bond prices? It does not give much confidence for conservative investors. I mean, it is an anxiety-inducing time when it feels like every asset class at the moment is falling, right? So that does make it difficult for people who do have that more conservative personality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've been thinking about this for quite a while, actually, when interest rates were really low, and if you were retired and, older, and you'd worked really hard for that nest egg, you've invested well along the way, and then suddenly the most appropriate option for your portfolio is a conservative approach, and interest rates are, super low and stayed really low for a really long time, then I think that would have caused a ton of stress for a lot of people. So I totally hear Bill, and I sympathize. Look, markets go up and down, share markets go up and down, bond markets go up and down. All I can say is that interest rates are still quite low, but are going up. Maybe depending on your goals, it is time to reevaluate, your allocation of things. But if you're looking at a long-term time horizon, stuff's going to change. And it's really only the money that we need sort of within the next 5 years that we need to be making really conservative decisions about now. So it's going to depend a lot on your personal circumstances. But yeah, I hear you. It feels like everything's going all over the place. And all I can do is shrug and say, stuff changes. This is life, and it's, and financial life is not perfect.
Another great question here from Arthur, who says, talking about boring, how many of you, if you could start investing from zero again, would replace investments for a single broad ETF such as VT, which I believe is the Vanguard Total World Stock Index Fund? So basically saying, would you take a massive set and forget approach of just a single broad global fund versus trying to pick and choose? If you were starting over again, would you? I mean, that's an interesting thought, right?
It is. No endorsement on the particular ETF that just got named. But I mean, look, I'm an academic. You're assuming that I've been picking and choosing my own like little stocks and that I haven't had a set and forget approach this whole time, which I totally have. That said, my husband, he lives and breathes having an active investment portfolio. He just really enjoys looking into all of these things. It's a hobby for him, essentially. So we have the well-diversified, the boring, passive investments that I academically know, over the long term will probably outperform an active portfolio. And then I just totally back him to live his life and to do what he really enjoys doing, because, it can't all be the perfectly sound decision all of the time. We're living. You have to live now as well as keep an eye on the future.
I often think as well that there is an argument for you want to have a good investing strategy, obviously, but there's also the argument of whatever keeps you interested, and investing is also a good investing strategy, even if it might not be the perfect 100% optimized one. So some people will enjoy having a little look around, having a little dabble, and some people won't. Some people will just want to set and forget, and the data does say that's what works for most people. But maybe, if it keeps you interested, if it keeps you invested, well, maybe you do want to change things up. And I think it is going to come down sometimes again to that personality. Really great question here from Tim. So I'm going to chuck this in as well. Tim says, I guess this depends upon the person, but how frequently would you recommend people checking up on how their investments are performing? I got into what I think was a bad habit of looking multiple times a day.
One track to unhappiness. Money doesn't buy happiness. Checking your stock portfolio multiple times a day certainly doesn't, unless you are trading at that high level of frequency, which is probably not the case. Look, I tend to be on the set and forget type approach. I have a look when something changes that might impact the decisions that I made back then, or if my savings gets to a certain amount and I'm looking at what to do with that money. And I might then check in and have that investment type mentality. If it's something you really enjoy doing and it's adding to the overall like enjoyment of your life, then you do you, check as many times as you like. But the moment that it starts causing stress, like anything else, in moderation, you just pare it back. And I think, probably once a week is a nice little middle ground there, particularly during times of high volatility where what happened yesterday could be vastly different to what happens today or what is going to be the case Wednesday next week.
Yeah. Now, this question is, I believe, from Aspie. I hope that I am pronouncing that right. But they say, in today's environment, what percentage contribution would you allocate off your wages towards KiwiSaver, and what percentage into different types of funds like conservative, balanced growth, high risk? Now, I think we do need to put a quick disclaimer on that. We can't give personalized financial advice. This is obviously going to be a general discussion of how today's environment would impact your decisions in terms of how much to invest in and how conservative versus high risk to go. But Ayesha, what do you make of that question?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think all the standard stuff applies. So one thing that I really try and get across when we are talking about the entire portfolio is really you can't look at one piece in isolation, which I think this question does really nicely. So it's going to depend on your goals. So if your primary objective, an investment objective, is to save money for retirement, right? And you're very happy with how your KiwiSaver fund, is performing. You like the fact that it might sit on an app on your phone. You can check it on your browser fairly easily. You like what they're doing. Then, that allocation, you might not need to be doing other investments on the side. However, if you have those long-term goals and you don't necessarily want the money locked away in the way that KiwiSaver is for retirement, then you're going to have to be doing something else alongside. How much money are you going to need before you can access those KiwiSaver funds? And I think that's the key thing, because it all comes down to time horizon. We're being safe with the money that we need within the next 5 years. We're being a little bit riskier with the money we're going to need in sort of the next 10 years. And we're being quite risky with money that we're going to need, in 10 plus 15 years time. And so I think when we look at it like that and we look at what our goals are, both financial and non-financial, it helps us work out those pockets of money and how much risk we can take. That is my broad brush approach. But honestly, if you know what you're doing, back your process, make these decisions, check in on them when you need to, and then, set and forget. Trust yourself.
Yeah. Now, we've had a couple of book recommendations dropped into the chat, and I just want to mention those. We've had someone recommend The Soul of Money book by Lynn Twist. They say they enjoyed that and highly recommend. And another investing book is called Millionaire Teacher, The 9 Rules of Wealth You Should Have Learned in School. Now, I just want to say up front, I haven't read either of those, but I think it's great when people share investing resources that helped them. So I just wanted to share those books with everyone else who's listening now. We're almost out of time. So unfortunately, this next question, we're going to have quite a quick answer from you, but I just want to squeeze this in. The question is, emerging markets countries have been stated to be the future superpowers. However, a 30-year return of China ETF is actually 0%. So what's your opinion on investing in emerging markets, China, Taiwan, Brazil, Mexico, India, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we go back to risk, and now I'm sounding like a broken record, but it goes back to risk. So emerging markets are emerging markets that we tend to associate with higher levels of risk. We expect to match that risk with higher levels of growth. That's kind of the idea here, right? Is that they are the emerging powers. However, I will just remind everyone that, lots of people were invested in Russian stocks, and then, Ukraine and war happened, and we saw this kind of realignment in live time of the risk that we all associated with, Russia, and then what actually happened that I don't think very many people saw coming. And so when you look at any of these environments, we need to recognize that, you are taking higher levels of risk, okay, with an expectation of growth and then therefore higher returns theoretically over the medium and long term. If you're diversified geographically, it's probably not going to matter. It's all going to come out in the wash.
Oh, fascinating stuff. Well, thank you very much to everyone for their question. Thank you for everyone who's tuned in. And a big thank you to Dr. Ayesha Scott for joining us. We really appreciate your time and your insights.
Thank you very, very much for having me. It's been awesome.
Now, if you're not following the podcast, you can on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a rating and a comment with who and what you'd like to hear about. Why not check out Shared Lunch Live as a Thursday lunchtime webinar via Crowdcast or watch it anytime on the Sharesies YouTube channel. Grab the link in the description of this podcast. Next week on Shared Lunch, we'll be joined by Fisher Funds Senior Portfolio Manager David McLeish to talk income investing. We'll try and sort you out with some passive income hacks. Register for that discussion on Crowdcast so you can hear conversations play out in real time and get your questions answered on air. The link is in our podcast description. Until next time, enjoy the rest of your week. Stay safe.